Welcome everybody. Good morning, good evening, good afternoon for those of you all across the world following this seminar. My name is Dirk Pilat and I'm the Deputy Director of the OECD's Directorate for Science, Technology and Innovation, which is the part of the OECD that supports the work on consumer policy at the OECD. And it's my pleasure to open this joint OECD-ASEAN event on nudging consumers towards greener choices, which is organized alongside an event that is taking place tomorrow in Seoul, Korea, which is an OECD Southeast Asia Ministerial Forum on Human-Centered Future Partnership for a Smarter, Greener and More Inclusive ASEAN. I think we all know that consumers play an important role increasingly for sustainable consumption and trying to move towards a more sustainable economy, and that was really what we will be focusing on in this session. So today we will hear from a number of experts from OECD and ASEAN countries who will discuss how policymakers, civil society and businesses are all working together towards the implementation of a robust sustainable consumption schemes to foster consumer engagement in the green economy. And of course, given the globalization of our supply chains, but also growing consumer engagement in e-commerce, which is really, of course, cross-border in nature, it's very important to try and discuss, I think, across different countries and jurisdictions, so we can also try to see whether we can get more coherence in policies in this area. And I think that's important to also understand what are some consumer attitudes in this area, to recognize the power that social and psychological forces have in sort of influencing the decisions that consumers make in purchasing. So we really want to understand a little bit better how that works, and also what the behavioral insights that are, I think, being explored in different countries look like. So we have, I think, a really exciting and interesting lineup today. And to start with the discussion, I'd like to first ask the chair of the OECD's Committee on Consumer Policy, Hugh Stevenson, to start and give some welcome remarks. Hugh, I know it's very early in the morning for you. Welcome, thank you, and for being with us. And please, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Dirk. I am delighted to participate in this joint ASEAN-OECD event. As folks at the OECD like to point out, consumers are at the heart of the global economy, and their spending accounts for around 60% of gross domestic product in most OECD countries. And as recognized in Goal 12 of the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, consumers can have a major impact on green growth by purchasing sustainable products with desirable environmental properties such as recyclability, energy efficiency, and by otherwise modifying their behavior to support environmental goals. Sustainable consumption issues have actually been on the radar of the OECD's Committee on Consumer Policy for more than a quarter of a century. Back in 1996, the committee conducted a survey in OECD countries that captured some of the key challenges. Quote, even willing consumers are often unable to change their behavior as they may not have access to satisfactory recycling programs or adequate environmental and product information to help them make educated purchasing and lifestyle decisions. In 2011, the OECD work on green growth and consumer behavior highlighted additional factors that affected consumer understanding and motivation. And these included the financial costs and benefits of making greener choices, how much consumers know about environmental issues, the impact of their consumption decisions, and the practical actions that they really effectively could take. And finally, the impact that behavioral biases could have on consumer and household choices. Also in 2011, the Committee on Consumer Policy, after some years of study, released a report on the effectiveness of green claims in commerce. And the report flagged three key areas as a priority for further work by international organizations. The first priority was best practices for addressing environmental claims to consumers, while at the same time taking into account that consumer perception of green claims may vary by place, including may vary among countries. The second priority was empirical research on consumers' perceptions, and behaviors. How, in other words, do consumers understand environmental benefits, marketing claims, and even the vocabulary that may be used in this sustainability setting? The third priority was developing effective approaches for raising consumer awareness. More recently, a 2019 OECD report that was prepared for the G20 International Consumer Conference held in Japan that same year pointed to studies on the gap between consumer sentiment and consumer action. And it also noted the scarcity of internationally comparable data in this area. It identified a couple of questions that are also useful for the discussion today. First, to what degree have consumer authorities developed policy initiatives and taken enforcement actions in this area? And what does that experience teach us? Second, how effective are business and consumer education programs on sustainable consumption and making green choices? And finally, what remains to be done to deepen our understanding of consumer attitudes towards sustainable consumption and to address the related behavioral biases? Let me conclude by noting that the OECD Committee on Consumer Policy and the ASEAN Committee on Consumer Protection have already held 2 joint meetings to discuss cutting-edge e-commerce and June from the participation of ASEAN's Deputy Secretary General Satvinder in a 3-day virtual international conference that was organized by the OECD Committee to celebrate its 50th anniversary. And we can all gain from a dialogue like this one to share the policy and the empirical work that improves our understanding of how consumers perceive environmental issues and environmental claims. So we are delighted to partner with ASEAN again today as we navigate the digital and the environmental marketplaces of the future. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Yu, and thank you very much for your intervention. Very interesting, I think, to hear from you. I do see that Ms. Christiane Rohleder has just joined us now, so I think actually I was going to turn to our next speaker, but I would like to first now invite our first keynote speaker to open our discussion today, Dr. Christiane Rohleder, who's Germany State Secretary for Consumer Protection at the Federal Ministry for the Environment, Nature, Conservation, Nuclear Safety, and Consumer Protection. So, Dr. Rohleder, the floor is yours, and apologies for having some difficulties for getting in. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, dear participant, I'm delighted to take part in this exchange with you here today. Many of the problems that threaten humanity around the world are linked to our behavior as consumers. The rapidly diminishing biodiversity, the loss of fertile land, the extreme weather events caused by climate change. With every drought, every flood, and every species that goes extinct, it becomes clear that we can no longer afford to live at nature's expense, to consume at nature's expense. More than a quarter of all greenhouse gas emissions are caused by consumer activity in private households. For this reason, Germany has set itself an ambitious goal to cut the share of consumption-related greenhouse gas emissions per capita in Germany in half by 2030. Consumer policy must play an active role in achieving this goal. And this is why we have decided to more closely integrate the areas of consumer and environmental protection, combining them into one single ministry. One of our ministry's main priorities will be extending the lifespan of products and promoting repairs. And at the international level, we are now also increasingly focusing on the best ways of promoting sustainable consumption on a broad scale, without excluding people with low incomes or other groups. That's very important for us. I'm therefore very grateful that the OECD Southeast Asia Forum, with its so many participating countries, has made strengthening sustainable consumption such a prominent topic of its conference today. Dear participants, Many studies have shown us that most consumers want to consume in a more sustainable way. Our task as consumer policymakers is to remove anything that prevents them from actually doing so. According to a study that was conducted in Germany some time ago, the price and brand were the most important aspects for consumers' purchasing decisions. Nevertheless, consumers are increasingly seeking quick and easy access to reliable information about the environmental and social impact of products. And we as consumer policymakers can make this easier for everyone to consume in a more sustainable ways with default settings and digital tools, for example. Of course, the digital tools themselves must stand up to scrutiny in terms of their own resource consumption. Allow me to give you 3 brief examples from Germany of how default settings and apps can help to support sustainable consumer behavior while taking into account the price consciousness of consumers. Years of appeals asking consumers to save energy by unplugging unused electrical appliances rather than leaving them in standby mode were ineffective. It was only the introduction of a default setting ensuring that a device no longer draws power in standby mode that had any effect. Eco-design requirements for manufacturers are therefore an important parameter that we can adjust in order to facilitate sustainable behavior for all consumer groups. For many years, we in Germany have supported an educational initiative on the meaning of various product labels and seals. The sheer number of labels can be confusing for many consumers, and they are not always able to judge the informative value of these labels. The German government therefore supports the app Siegelklarheit, which translates to clarity in labels, as a digital tool. The app evaluates existing labels from a wide range of consumer areas based on a standardized methodology involving various different criteria, such as whether a product is socially responsible or environmentally friendly. Using the app, consumers can simply scan a product label while out shopping and immediately can see if they may have made a sustainable choice or not. Tino Clemens, who is the expert for this tool within the German government, will talk about this in detail later. Since in a way that conserves resources, we in Germany are currently funding a consumer information project called App Checker. This enables consumers to check to what extent apps are themselves contributing to high or low power consumption, and apps are the least harmful to the climate. Dear participants, these examples from Germany serve to illustrate how quick access to understandable information can make it easier for consumers to make sustainable decisions. At the same time, it can help to make greenwashing more difficult. Yet consumer information can only ever be one part of our efforts to create a sustainable global economy. Even with the best possible information, we can only ever reach a certain number of people. We must find the right balance in order to increase the lifespan of products and ensure that consumers are not even put in a position where they can make non-sustainable decisions, and this without exceeding their available financial means. Dear participants, the United Nations has clearly outlined our common challenge in the 2030 agenda. We can be the first generation to succeed in ending poverty, just as we may be the last to have a chance of saving the planet. Based on this understanding of the current state of the world, the United Nations has drawn a clear conclusion. We must take action. We must transform the world in which we live and take a new path together towards sustainability and resilience. And we must leave no one behind on this path. There's an old saying that goes, if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go with others. In order to achieve our objectives, we need both. We want to act quickly, we need to act quickly, which is why we need to outstanding ideas of individuals. And we also want to go far, which is why we need to exchange such ideas so we can move forward together. This is what makes today's exchange so important. Thank you very much for enabling this dialogue to take place today, and thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, State Secretary. Dankeschön. Very useful to hear about the German initiatives and some of the new thinking that I think is happening in the German government. Just to let you know, we will have a photo taken after the next speaker, so please stick around for a little while longer. And moving now from Europe to the ASEAN region, I'd like to introduce our next keynote speaker, Ms. Datin Rosalina Binti Wahab. She's the Deputy Secretary General for Consumer Empowerment of Malaysia's Ministry of Domestic Trade and Consumer Affairs, and she's also the chair of the ASEAN Committee for Consumer Protection. So, Ms. Datin Rosalina Binti Wahab, please, you have the floor.
Thank you so much, Mr. Pilat. Ladies and gentlemen, good morning and good afternoon. Let me first and foremost begin my remarks by expressing my sincere appreciation to the OECD for initiating and working alongside the ASEAN Committee on Consumer Protection to organize this important event. It is an honor for me to speak today alongside distinguished speakers and panelists whom will discuss two very important topics to deepen understanding of consumer attitudes towards sustainable consumption and the policy initiatives to nudge consumers towards greener choices. It goes without saying that the significant economic growth we experienced prior to the COVID-19 pandemic, for the large part, was due to the increasing buying power of consumers. The advent of online shopping in tandem with improved and more affordable access to the World Wide Web provided consumers with a window towards a wider selection of products with competitive prices. Such technology created a shift in consumer behavior, where they can purchase any goods from grocery items, clothing, gadgets, and more through online means. This is even more apparent at the height of the COVID-19 pandemic, where government restrictions and lockdowns are introduced in an effort to stop the spread of the virus. E-commerce transaction in Indonesia alone was projected to increase by 48.5% from 2020 to 2021, with the overall transaction valued at approximately 28.5 billion USD. As for Malaysia, the e-commerce revenue grew 32.7% to 213.5 billion USD in the year 2020, and by third quarter 2021, Malaysia's e-commerce revenue reached 190.9 billion USD, which is a 23.1% increase. Although the steady increase of consumptions and transactions has benefited us, we must aim to achieve long-term economic growth that would benefit social and environmental needs as well. It goes without saying that consumption of any form will have some kind of impact to our environment, especially towards the finite resources available. In addition, increased consumption may also generate increased waste, which can directly contribute to climate change, air pollution, and many other possible negative impacts towards our ecosystems, many of which could be irreversible for many years to come. Sustainable consumption is also closely related to sustainable production and sustainable lifestyles. A sustainable lifestyle minimizes ecological impacts while enabling a flourishing life for individuals, households, communities, and beyond. It is the product of individual and collective decisions, which are in turn conditioned, facilitated, and constrained by social norms, political institutions, public policies, infrastructures, markets, and culture. To ensure sustainable consumption and production patterns, the following premises will need to be met. First, effective use of resources and minimization of waste and pollution. Second, use of renewable resources within their capacity for renewal. And third, fuller product life cycles. Ladies and gentlemen, as consumers become more sophisticated, their interests shift to ethical and environmental considerations related to the production and supply of consumer goods and services. Based on the results of 2020 Healthy and Sustainable Living Survey conducted by GlobeScan, consumers worldwide are willing to change their behavior to consume sustainably, provided guidance as well as easy and affordable solutions are given. During the 2021 United Nations Climate Change Conference, a major study shows that sustainability is becoming increasingly important in consumers' purchasing decisions, especially as consumers see themselves as the primary catalyst for change. Globally, 85% of people indicate that they have shifted their purchase behavior towards being more sustainable in the past 2 years. At the same time, it is also important to recognize the essential role of businesses in producing goods that uses minimum natural resources and toxic materials. In later stages, businesses also who adopt sustainable production methods may have a competitive advantage towards consumers who are shifting towards green products. This will eventually force other businesses to innovate new technologies, enabling sustainable production or to adopt sustainable production methods should they want to compete within the global economy. However, it must be noted that for the most part, sustainable consumption is voluntarily with little to no immediate incentives for both consumers and producers due to the absence of government mandates. It is also no secret that many green products are usually at a more premium price, which hinders consumers from purchasing them. The COVID-19 pandemic not only impacted the lives and livelihoods of people in ASEAN, but also disrupted societies and economies at large, as well as any sustainable development initiatives. Although it led to a decrease in consumption and decarbonized the world economy, it has shifted consumer behaviors, which made some unprecedented changes or disruptions to many supply chains. However, one silver lining that the pandemic brought to us is the opportunity to build recovery plans that will reverse current trends and change our consumption and production patterns towards a more sustainable future, hopefully even after the pandemic has subsided. Ladies and gentlemen, I would like to briefly update you on the efforts ASEAN has made on sustainable development. We have recently adopted the Framework for Circular Economy for the ASEAN Economic Community, or AEC, on 18 October 2021. This framework aims to guide ASEAN in achieving its long-term goals of a resilient economy, resource efficiency, and sustainable and inclusive growth. There are 5 strategic priorities in the framework, which includes, first, standard harmonization and mutual recognition of circular products and services. Second, trade openness and trade facilitation in circular goods and services. Third, enhanced role of innovation, digitalization, and emerging or green technologies. Fourth, competitive sustainable finance and innovative ESG investment. And finally, efficient use of energy and other resources. Building on existing ASEAN initiatives, the framework seeks to explore new opportunities and collaborations with various ASEAN pillars, dialogue partners, and the private sector to scale up and accelerate the region's transition to low carbon economy. Sustainable consumption is part of Principle 5 of the ASEAN High-Level Principles on Consumer Protection, which stipulates that informed consumers have an essential role to play in promoting consumption that is environmentally, economically, and socially sustainable through their choices of producers. In line with this principle, the project on the promotion of sustainable consumption in ASEAN, which aims of raising awareness on sustainable consumption among consumer protection authorities and relevant stakeholders, has been implemented since 2019. The project is led by the ASEAN Committee on Consumer Protection, or ACCP, with the support from the Japan ASEAN Integration Fund. The project also supported the convening of the ASEAN Regional Forum on the promotion of sustainable consumption, held from 29 to 30th August 2019. In continuation of this forum, the project also supports the development of the ASEAN Sustainable Consumption Toolkit Guidance, a toolkit to promote a better understanding of the behavioral, communications, regulatory, and economic tools related to sustainable consumption. The toolkit consists of 4 modules, which includes the following: understanding the concepts and principles of sustainable consumption, best practices and approaches to policies that promote sustainable consumption, tools and instruments used in influencing consumer behavior, communication, information provision tools, such as product information through labeling and certification, economic instruments, such as incentives and regulatory instruments, and use of appropriate instruments and tools in selected areas such as food sector, energy, and consumer electronics. The toolkit will enhance the capacity of consumer protection authorities in ASEAN to promote sustainable consumption with information on behavioral, communications, regulatory, and economic tools. We hope to publish the toolkit in early 2022 on the ACCP website. Although most consumers have a desire to make more sustainable purchasing decisions, they face significant barriers in turning this desire into action. These barriers, as I previously mentioned, includes purchase decisions due to the premium price on green products or the overwhelming information on complex environmental claims. Consumers may see this as a risk and prefer products they are familiar with, or don't see their peers changing their behaviors. Consumer inaction may also be influenced by other factors, such as lack of clear information on the sustainability, repairability, durability of products, and lack of easy access to sustainable products and spare parts. Today, we want to explore and understand these issues, as well as take some of the initiatives and actions that may potentially influence consumer behavior. The panel discussions will deliberate on the following. First, policy and business initiatives.
Ms. Rosanina, can I please ask you to wrap up, because we are really running out of time for the panelists in a second.
All right, to strengthen partnership amongst all stakeholders is necessary to ensure sustainable development of our economies. I look forward to a fruitful discussion in the lead up to many more pertinent initiatives between our governments that would help expedite the shift to a more sustainable consumption. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair, and apologies for interrupting you, but I think it's
okay.
A little bit of time for the panelists as well.
All right, thank you so much, sir.
Very interesting to hear from all the things that ASEAN is doing in this area, and we very much look forward to seeing the toolkit. I thought from the two keynotes and also from the chair earlier on from our Consumer Policy Committee, there's a lot of coherence, a lot of similar issues being addressed by ASEAN and by the OECD and also in European countries. So interesting to hear that. Before we go to the panel, where I'm afraid we will have limited time, I'd like to ask all our keynote speakers, all our panelists, to turn on their cameras for a minute so we can quickly take a photo of everybody in the meeting room. So if everybody can turn on their camera, then we can quickly take a photo. We know it's not the same as having a real photo somewhere, but it is the best we can do. Not sure if anybody else is listening who wants to turn on the camera. Otherwise, we will do it right now. So Alice, please. Yeah.
Lovely. Thank you all. Okay,
yeah.
We cheese. Perfect. I'm just going to take one more. Everybody look at the camera. Perfect. Thank you all.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Alice, and thank you all for a very good introduction. Now we move to the panel, the first panel, and I won't give too much of an introduction here. Unfortunately, the panelists, you all really please stick to 5 minutes for your intervention, because we want to also move to the second panel. I think this is really to have an exchange a little bit on attitudes towards sustainable consumption. This is something that also at the OECD we're starting to work more on to understand better how behavioral insights play a role here, how we really need to understand how consumers are reacting, perhaps with information overload be one of the issues that we need to deal with. So we want to hear from a variety of speakers on what they are doing in this area, and to really have a bit of an exchange on good practices, and hopefully we'll have a bit of time for a question, but I think we are a little bit late already. So let me first move immediately to the first speaker, Hendrik Bruns. He's a policy analyst from the European Commission Competence Centers on Behavioral Insights, and he will talk a little bit about some of the work that he's doing. So the floor is yours, please, and 5 minutes, please.
Thank you very much, Dirk. I'm going to share my screen, and I hope you are able now to see it. And I'm starting with a bit of maybe an outline presentation because I'm focusing more on something that will be discussed in the second panel, but I'm going to attempt to strike the connection to this focus on the deeper understanding of consumer attitudes and how maybe our work or work done within by our colleagues on understanding labels, environmental labels within the European Union may contribute to that. And I wanted to start just with an outline of the different labels that are existing in the European Union and that some of you, probably all of you are familiar with, and maybe some of you have already seen. Then you may be familiar with the energy efficiency product labels that are on white appliances like washing machines, fridges, that have been recently redesigned based on behavioral studies that showed that an A to G scale is more effective than an A++, A+ scale. There's the eco label and the organic logo, which are basically not showing any of this like ranking, but they're just highlighting that a certain product, food product, for example, fulfills certain standards or has certain characteristics. And then there's a very recent logo, which is on single-use or some single-use plastic products, for example, plastic cups, or on cigarette packages, or on tampons, other products, for example, which are here in the top right, where you see this mix of red and blue pictograms that show something which is not allowed or not desired, like discarding in nature, and something like a consequence in blue thereof, so that it harms, for example, the environment. So here you can see these are different types of labels. You have on the left-hand side the energy label, which is a graded label, which identifies good and bad products. There is a label like the eco label and the organic logo that highlight a desirable characteristic of a product. And in the top right, you have some sort of storytelling labeling, so highlighting a undesirable behavior, so a negative label element, and an undesirable consequence, so harm for the environment. So these are, three different labels that are being used at the moment within the European Union, and of course also other countries. And most or all of these labels have been informed by behavioral evidence. And this is something that is often desired within the European, or within the JRC, at least in our work, that these behavioral labels are informed by evidence, and evidence coming from the behavioral sciences. And I just want to give two examples showing two experiments that we were involved with. Here, for example, looking at comparing basically, does it make a difference whether we highlight the positive, the desirable elements of a product versus the negative elements of a product, versus giving a graded, like on the energy label on a product. And there, for example, we have run experiments that compare these different label types and among more than 1,000 participants in different countries within the European Union, different member states. And there people basically just had to choose between three different types of smartphones or three different types of microwaves. And these products also differed with respect to the label that were used. And in the end, we found that in this specific case of purchasing smartphones or microwaves, maybe generalizable to other consumer products, we found that graded labels, so labels that grade in which range of products with respect to energy efficiency a product uses, a product is positioned, these labels are most effective versus the negative versus positive sustainability labels. In another study, for example, on the effective marketing of single-use plastic products, which was run in more than 8,000 participants from different countries. This was
wrap up, Hendrik, if you
okay. Yeah, and there basically we found that there was the most desirable, the best label was the one that was highlighting the negative marking of a product. That's it, for example. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, and thank you very much also to sticking for time. Very interesting to hear what you're doing and how behavioral insights are really also trying to influence the labeling, which is not always what you think, but it's very interesting to hear about that. So we move immediately to our second expert, Dr. Paul Selvarai, who's the Secretary General of the Federation of Malaysian Consumers Associations, FOMCA. So please, the floor is yours. And I think you're still muted.
Okay. Thank you for the opportunity, Mr. Pilar, for giving Afamka a chance to share our experience. Let me begin by saying that a behavior change is difficult, yeah? Even for areas in which we are, personal well-being, for example, health, food, exercise, people find it difficult to change their behavior. And I would say for sustainable consumption, it becomes even more difficult. And when we talk about behavioral change, we are talking of the way people's attitude, people's perception. We're trying to change that towards a kind of intended behavior. But even with intention, that it doesn't necessarily change into behavior. For example, in a study in Harvard Business Review entitled "The Elusive Green Consumer," it was reported through a study that although 65% had intended to purchase sustainable products, only 20% do so. So intention does not automatically come into behavior. And secondly, behavioral change involves change in the environment. Next slide, please. To an environment that supports behavior. Next slide, please. Okay. Why is behavioral change difficult? I think the consequences, when we talk about greenhouse gas, extreme temperatures and things like that, of course, there are serious issues. But for the consumer, very often these are issues that are distant from the self, something that's hazy, negative issue in the future filled with uncertainty. It will be quite difficult for the consumer to link his behavior to planetary negative consequences, which would actually motivate him. Yeah. And of course, it involves cost, whether it's money, whether it's time, it's convenience. Secondly, we're also dealing with different kinds of consumers, those who are with different age of different understanding, different motivation, different economic levels. And obviously, this issue will address to them differently. And thirdly, we are also looking at supportive environments. I mean, if things is too expensive, if we talk of recycling, but the mechanism is not in place, it's not going to be helpful. So what is needed forward is a holistic but flexible strategy. Next, please. Now, in a project that we work with CI in India, I mean, it is a low-income community, and with a single behavior, which is on encouraging people to use low-energy bulbs, plus with all the experiences. I think the lessons learned from that is very useful in terms of behavioral change. Now, the first thing we need to do, we did was that we carried out a survey to baseline what are the behaviors, what is the understanding, especially of green products and community dynamics, and whether the environment supported such a change. Next slide. Next slide. Okay, basically we want to do three things. We want to change consumers so that they have a desire to change towards greener products. We want to change the environment. And third, importantly, we also want to make sure that the project sustains. Okay, next slide. Okay, these are the lessons. I mean, using the OECD term behavioral levers. So the first way is the way that we framed the information, yeah? And the information was framed in such a way that the focus was on how the consumers would benefit. In this case, it was on savings. The benefit to the broader environment is something else, but at least there was a focus, because these are poor people. Secondly, we had to push the idea that this was a credible idea, and we brought in credible sources, so product demonstration and others, so that people have confidence in the information that was given. Yeah, and thirdly, we were very cultural sensitive. A lot of local methods were used, local street plays and things like that were used to engage the people in a form that they best understood, taking into consideration their cultural setting. Next. Now, obviously, the environment did not support such a change. The shopkeepers are selling, for example, only high energy bulbs. So the whole environment needs to be changed, right from the shopkeepers to the manufacturers, to looking at the market review of the supply chain so that there was no price manipulation. So not only the individual, but the market, the environment itself need to be changed. Next. Okay, we are going to go fast on this now. Yeah.
Yeah, Dr. Rai, could you try to wrap up as well? Thank you.
Okay. I think this is an important slide before I just summarize. The very important thing that we learned in the committee is that the peers and influence played a major role. So in any changes, we have to engage the community. We started with starter groups, and this influenced the other groups. I will just summarize this. I think, can I go to the second last slide, please? The slide with the pictures, please. Next slide. Okay. Now, this is in Malaysia, we have the national blueprint, 2016 to 2030. But just 2 months ago, we had a flood. And after that flood, I'm talking of 2 months ago, the parliamentarians asking the government to acknowledge the role of climate change. So that means, government is not yet made a commitment in the sense of how to move forward. Final slide, please. Final slide. Okay, the summary is that there must be commitment from the government in terms of messaging, in terms of education, and in terms from the highest level to the local government level, and to engage with key stakeholders so that actual transformation can happen. Thank you, Dex. So sorry for the late. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Dr. Rai. Very, very interesting, I think, to hear some very concrete examples, also how you're applying it and your thinking in this area. Happy to, and I think everybody is really interested to see all the slides from the different presentations later on, so we'll try to have those shared if everybody's in agreement. So, as I think this has been announced in the chat, we'll now move one of the speakers a little bit forward, because we know he has to leave a little bit early. So we move to Mr. Tommy Chiptadayas, and apologies if I don't pronounce your name exactly right. It's not an easy name. Who is the co-founder and CEO of Green Hope, green technology company based in Indonesia, which is focusing on addressing plastic pollution and through biodegradable plastic technology. So please, the floor is yours. Look forward to hearing from you.
Thank you so much for your for inviting us over here. We're glad. And actually, my name is quite close, actually, Chiptajaya. You're very, very good. So we are sharing these challenges from the perspective of innovators, disruptors, if you will, and tackling complex problem, multiple dependencies upstream and downstream. So hopefully we can learn a lot from our multitudes of failures as well. So this is in the plastic world. This is the big picture. We are in the biggest transition ever from traditional plastics to green. But green doesn't define as merely materials. It also requires to be mindset and lifestyle associated with it. But there's a reason why of the 400 million tons a year consumption, 10 million tons leakages to nature, only 10 to 12% are being recycled. Recycling has been there for 3 decades, for instance. So there's a lot of question about what are the viable solutions. And we've looked into everything. We tried everything, many failures. As you all know, there's no silver bullet. Every solution has strength and limitation and massive homework to do. Recycling, one of the biggest homework being the economic viability, the reverse logistics required, whereas the main value proposition of plastic is the cheapness and the longevity of it. But then recycling needs to reverse that. That will be very challenging. Biodegradable also have limitation in terms of what environment does it have the climate and supporting environment to biodegrade. So all these things actually requiring us to be a doctor. And this is the first message to the consumer, that there's no single solution that we need to be fanatic about. We need to be practical. We need to reduce where we can reduce, and we need to educate the consumer like the same way. We need to reuse where we can, all the shopping bags, thermos, lunch boxes, and everything. But when we talk about packaging, modern packaging, we can't escape, when we talk about global trade, we can't escape packaging. And most likely we need plastic or plastic-like materials. Then we should ask ourselves, is it economically viable to recycle, such as PET bottles? Very good. Recycle to polyester, high-value fiber. But then a lot of the end-of-life situation becomes very challenging for non-economically viable to recycle. This is Green Hope's perspective. We are contributing as piece of the puzzle contribution to complete these various solutions. It can be 4R, 5R, but the point is, from our experience, 3R alone is not enough. The optimality and the economic viability of the solution changes where your geography is, and climate and economic viability, the buying power of the people. So this is the message for consumer. You need to reduce, reuse, recycle, and you buy biodegradable product where it's not economically viable to recycle. Now, Green Hope, we are doing 10 years R&D, 7 years patent process. We are all our own bioresins. And the key of bioplastics in the bioplastic world is really ushering the new materials that is locally sourced. Because one of the key of green design, key principle is really locally sourced materials. So Green Hope is really scanning for Southeast Asian, economically viable green feedstock. And one of it is tapioca starch. We see in the tapioca starch to replace conventional oil-based plastic has multiple benefits from what we've seen. One is, for instance, Is this bioplastic trend in line with the world? Very much so. Japan, for instance, we are very excited to see how the government is determined to at least allocate 20%, 30% of their consumption to be bioplastics inside of 8 years, next 8 years. This actually is positive because they see it from few folds. One is kg per kg moving to bio-based on some of them. I'm not saying entire plastic usage needs to be bioplastic. On some of them, you can reduce GHG emission, therefore more greener. And secondly, you can also have positive social impact to the farmers and small businesses. This is what excites us in Green Hope, where we can tie up a more modern sustainability consumption, a greener and more sustainable consumption to social impact on the back end with the farmer and agri. That creates the really holistic economy, circular economy. And another thing that we learned, technology innovation alone is not enough. We need to work on the social innovation side, the collection, the separation, to make sure it's all economically viable. Otherwise, you know, just like marking your bags recyclable, that doesn't make it being actually recycled. It can end up in many rivers of Southeast Asia. So this is some of the example of all our items actually that we are still making it better, improving, but we have worked with many different partners. This is an example where with the Indonesian government, they do large-scale implementation recovery.
Can I ask you to wrap up as well, please? Can I ask you to wrap up? Thank you.
Sure. So these are the key challenges. There's no single solution. And the consumer side, we see they're already aware and want to go green. We just need to remove the barriers. They need to be economically viable, practical options. We need to communicate and educate with the labeling, and they need to have faith in the system, separate collections. And they need to have strong incentive and disincentive. I would say in my country, for instance, disincentive like hefty fines always works also. So combination of those will be needed. And it's also, we need to realize it's a long value chain, hard to communicate properly all the way to consumers. That's why technology, brands and government and NGOs, platforms like this, honest platforms to roadmap, conduct fair trials and impact measurements is needed. So that's what Green Hope's learning so far. So we're really able to collaborate together to really measure and to usher in the better systemic solutions, if you will. Thank you so much once again to be able to share our experience.
Thank you very much. Fascinating and very interesting work. Actually, there's some work at the OECD on this topic as well. So very interesting to see what you're doing in this area. So let me move to the final speaker of this panel. Dr. and if we can have perhaps the presentations closed, Dr. India Hudiani, who's a policy analyst with Indonesia's Ministry of Environment and Forestry. Please, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Pilat, for the time. Can host help me to share the screen, please?
Certainly. Would you have hosting rights? Would you like me to share your slides for you?
Yes, please. Yes. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I will try to deliver my presentation about deepening understanding of consumer attitude towards sustainable consumption. Is my voice clearly, Mr. Pilat? Yes. Next, please. Next, please. Next, please. Yes, SGP intervention in 2020 to 2030 is divided into two phases: acceleration phase in 2020 to 2024 and mainstream delivery phase in 2025 to 2030. According our National Midterm Development Plan 2020 to 2024, SGP drive resource efficiency, low carbon development strategy, green economy, circular economy. In this phase, there are 4 strategies. First, drive demand. Second, drive supply. Third, research pool. And fourth, creation of new job or economic potential through integrated waste management services. Next, please. Indonesia has prepared a document called Strategic Framework for SGP Achievement in Indonesia 2020 to 2030. The strategic framework document explains the strategy and phases of SCP intervention in Indonesia until 2030 and its practices for systematic and operational change for government, business, and communities. This document contains an update to the 10 years SCP Indonesia document, provide direction for implementing changes in sustainable consumption and production patterns in Indonesia, and reference in reformulating strategies and action for change SCP patterns, both at the site level and as a reference Keynote cross-sectoral collaboration for various SCP-related policies. Next, please. Ministry of Environment and Forestry compiled guidelines for action for SCP. This document is a collection of innovation and initiative SCP in Indonesia. Contains a menu of select essential action for SDGs 12 sustainable consumption and production, curated from practices in Indonesia in the last 5 years, and provides a uniting reference for SCP action that are doable, easy to understand, and inclusive for government, offices, community groups, and business. Next, please. The menu of actions for central and local government, community, business, and job creation. Next, please. Next, please. The four main composition of waste in Indonesia are: first, food waste; second, plastic; third, leaf and timber; and fourth, paper. To address these problems, the government took initiative. Please, next slide, please. To address these problems, the government took initiative, including one national policy and strategy for waste management. Second, Indonesia Ecolabel scheme. Next, please. Third, green public procurement or GPP. Fourth, verified eco-friendly technology. And 5, standard for green public facilities or SPMFP, that collaboration with related stakeholders to develop specific public facility standards to reform the consumer or user behavior through the facility design or provide information towards sustainable lifestyle. Thank you, Mr. Pilar.
Thank you very much, Dr. India Hudiani. Thank you very much for presenting a little bit about Indonesia's experience and what you're doing in this area. I think it would have been great if we had a little bit more time for discussion, but I think we have heard 4 very interesting presentations and perspectives on which I think show a lot of commonality as well. I think we're all struggling with very similar issues. We're all trying to do very similar things, and that, I think in my experience, really shows there's a lot of scope for learning from each other and talking to each other and saying, well, okay, what works, what doesn't work. And also, of course, this is an area where we are also talking often across borders. We need to also see whether approaches in one country are sort of coherent with what is happening in other countries. And of course, that's where both ASEAN and the OECD and other international organizations can play a role in collaborating and trying to figure out ways forward. So I want to thank all the speakers for this panel for their very interesting presentations and perspectives, and I hope we can share the presentations later on. I think there are also some areas where I would like to follow up with some of the people we've representing and see what we can do. I think it does show, I think, really the importance of consumer policies and consumer behavior in this area, something that is sometimes a little bit ignored still in the debates on climate change and environmental policies and so on, that we probably need to do more to integrate that and bring that perspective in. That being said, we also know this is not, there is no silver bullet. That was made by a number of speakers mentioned that. So it is important to make that link and to try and sort of see what the place of consumer policies and consumer behavior can be overall. So. Finally, I'd like to thank this, I think, what was a very interesting discussion also as a collaboration with our ASEAN colleagues and taking us forward for hopefully something that we continue in the past, possibly at some point in time also in person, which has some elements that I think we're all missing a little bit. So let me now end this session, and apologies for running a little late. There was a lot to go through. To move to Mr. Loy Tek Kyung, who will move us to the second panel. So thank you all, and I look forward to hearing more from you all. Bye.
Okay, thanks a lot, Dirk. I'm Louis Teck Keong, and I'm the head of the ASEAN's Competition, Consumer Protection and IPR Division. I'm very pleased to be holding this event today with the OECD. There's already a lot of work ongoing in the ASEAN member states in relation to sustainable consumption, production, and we will also be releasing our own toolkit on sustainable consumption. The forum is also consistent with the long-term goals of the ASEAN Framework for Circular Economy for the ASEAN Economic Community, and as was highlighted by our ACCP chair in her keynote speech earlier. So these long-term goals are to develop a resilient economy, resource efficiency, sustainable and inclusive growth. I'm pleased now to, without further ado, let me introduce our second expert panel discussion today on policy initiatives to nudge consumers towards greener choices. Our experts include government representatives from the Philippines, Germany, Korea, and Thailand. And they will share a range of examples of recent policy initiatives in their own jurisdictions to encourage consumers to make greener choices. I would like to firstly invite our first speaker to the floor, Ms. Ruth Castello, who's the Philippines Undersecretary for Consumer Protection. Undersecretary Castello will present on the Philippines' call to action for sustainable resilience and its Department of Trade and Industry 3 pillars for sustainable consumption and production, clean energy, the circular economy, as well as the future of food. Over to you, Undersecretary Castello, you have the floor.
Oh, yes. Hi. Thank you so much, Louis. And good afternoon, everyone. Well, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to everyone. Thank you, OECD, for having us here. Our topic for discussion is nudging consumers towards greener choices. It is a very practical question and seemingly mundane when you ask, how do we exactly live sustainably and what influences us? When shopping, for instance, we choose green products, but we do not have it all the time. We know that there is there's a lot of talk and a lot of information about going green, but in the Philippines, we still do not find that a lot in the retail market. And so we encourage consumers here to create the demand so that businesses will thrive and businesses will be encouraged to produce more green choices. This COVID-19 pandemic has changed drastically our consumer behavior. We have gone online, and in the Philippines as well. I'm sure it happens all over the world, where our platforms, the online platforms where we enjoy buying our stuff every day, would wrap our goods in so much plastic that we do not even know what to do with it. So what do we do in the Philippines? As the Consumer Protection Group of the Department of Trade and Industry, we ask the platforms to please lessen the plastic that they use to protect the goods, or maybe use alternative materials so that they can provide the consumers with other alternative materials that they can reuse also for other things. And why do we need to live sustainably? Of course, we have all heard already of needing to preserve planet Earth so that we can preserve the future of our future generations. Single-use plastic also has become a favorite choice. I'm sure not only in the Philippines but all over the world, because it's cheap, it's light, it's very easy to produce, and it's very easy to dispose of. But we also, of course, have to think of the damage that it has caused, that it causes the environment. In the Philippines, through this, the Secretary Ramon Lopez, we have a call to action towards sustainability, and we have 3 pillars here where you will see. Number 1, clean energy. In the next slide, there's clean energy. The example of Ms. Reutler from Germany earlier, that we turn off electricity when they're not in use. I think people have to understand the connection between the light that we have in our bedrooms to the power that we use to generate this, the power behind the power that makes it, and the effect to the environment or to the earth. And then we, of course, have circular economy. There's also green energy and sustainable supply chains. We need to educate the public. We need all consumers would need to understand the value of circular economy, whether we upcycle whatever we have, whether we recycle whatever we have, as compared to linear economy, we go for circular economy, and this is what we also aim for in the Philippines. Future food, plant-based meat instead of killing livestock and killing killing poultry. We also need to understand that we need to preserve the environment where they live. In the Philippines, also we push for good business. Green business is good business, so that we encourage even the micro, small, and medium enterprises to join us in this advocacy for sustainable consumption, so that we can grow towards sustainable resilience. In the next
1 minute
slide,
left,
you will
Ruth.
see. Yes. I'm hurrying it up. Okay, so these are the core values on ethical consumption that we have learned in Japan and that we advocate in the Philippines and in the ASEAN. We have to be thoughtful of the consumption behavior that we have, the consumption that we have, and then we have to be thankful for the blessings of nature. We need to be conscientious, because it is not just us, but the coming generations that will also benefit from the things that we do now, or how we preserve the environment. We have added another virtue here. We call it mindfulness in the Philippines. We have to be mindful of everything that we do, of the consumer choices that we make, of every use of the materials that we have, because these are all blessings from nature that we also need to preserve. In the next slide, Marielle, do we have slides? Okay, so in the Philippines, we want to go more direct sector-based interventions. We need to do this so that we can encourage not only consumers, but also businesses to go towards this direction. And then in the next slide, okay, no more slides. We need to preserve whatever we have now. We need to educate all our consumers. We need to all understand the effect of our consumption behavior to the environment, because this is going to be for the future of our children. So there you go. Thank you very much. From the Philippines, Louis, I turn over to you.
Thank you very much. Good timing. And thank you, Undersecretary Costello. I would like now to introduce the next speaker, Mr. Tino Clements, who is a policy analyst at the Germany's Federal Ministry for Economic Cooperation and Development. He will present several green consumption initiatives that the German government has launched, including a website for consumers to compare different eco-labeling schemes and an eco-labeling scheme for textiles. Mr. Clements, you have the floor.
Yes, thank you very much. And thank you very much for inviting me to present the German government initiative called Siegekleid, which you can literally means clarity in labels. And yeah, please next slide, please. What is Siegekleid? Based on the words of the State Secretary at the beginning of this event, it is an initiative of the German government to promote sustainable action by helping consumers better understand environmental and social sustainability labels. And it has a steering committee of a different ministry, which you can see here on the slide. Next slide, please. Siegekleid is it's an online consumer information tool with an own website and an associated app, mobile app. And the website is an important tool to assess reliability and addition of standards and labels. It provides credible advice to consumers regarding labels and standards used for a specific product group. At the same time, the standard-setting organizations are given an incentive to constantly work on improving their systems. Labels are assessed in different product groups, such as textiles, labels, or paper. Those evaluation results help to make the labels more comparable for consumers and allow for informed and more sustainable purchasing decisions. It's important to understand that Siegekleid does not develop or award any label by review existing labels for their credibility and sustainability in terms of social as well as environmental aspects. Overall, you can say that the Siegekleid aims to contribute to SDG 12 with a focus on sustainable consumption and production. Next slide, please. On this side, you can see an extract of the Siegekleid website. It's our label directory where you can discover the label and filters for your needs. The website is available in German and English language too. Next slide, please. how does the assessment work? Some few words to this. We use a tool called the Sustainability Standards Comparison Tool, for short SSCT, to execute our assessments. The SSCT is a methodology designed on behalf of Germany by leading national and international experts. You can see here the results are presented in such a simple way that everyone can understand the rating at a glance. You can see here the heart of the SST, it is a 3-star scale that brings the evaluation process, which takes many individual factors into account down to a simple statement, like you can see here, good choice or very good choice. Next slide, please. The requirements in the environmental and social dimensions are individually tailored to respective product groups to reflect the specific issues in those value chains. For example, some criteria to biodiversity or child labor, but also criteria focusing on the standard organization behind the label, because it's important to say how credible the standard system behind it is. For example, dealing with the assurance process or aspects of a standard setting process. Important to say that the credibility requirements are based on the credibility principles of the ISEAL Alliance, a global umbrella organization of standard organizations and close partner of ours. And last point to this, in our assessment process, we work closely together with the International Trade Center, because for us, it's important to have an independent organization that collects the data. Next slide, please. At the end, I will give you some words about another initiative. It's a green button. The green button is a BMZ initiative. It's a government-run certification label for sustainable manufactured textiles. It was launched in 2019 to provide guidance for consumers when shopping for sustainable textiles. It's a product which bears.
One last minute.
It's a product it's a product bears the green button. The company as a whole has been audited by independent experts to see whether it meets its due diligence obligations in its textile supply chain. So this is a feature that you have a due diligence obligation in the label. A last sentence, in addition to this, the product must have a credible label recognized by the green button, which proves that social and ecological minimum standards are observed in the supply chains, from waste, water to forced labor and so on. Thank you for this, and if you have any questions, please ask.
Thank you very much, Mr. Clemens, for keeping to the time. I would like now to introduce our next speaker, Mr. Stanley Seok from the Korea's Environmental Industry and Technology Institute, or KT. Mr. Seok will outline the factors that the Korean government takes into account in designing more impactful green consumption policies, and will give an overview of a green credit scheme that gives financial incentives to consumers who buy greener products and services. Over to you. You have the floor, Mr. Seok.
Thank you for having me. Now I would like to explain some example of Korean policy for sustainable consumption. Okay. As you know, nowadays more consumers are wanting sustainable product, but they have still a complaint about their choices is limited and they don't know how to access. Then also they have some lacking the trust on the environmental claims. And also at the same time, more businesses are seeking market opportunity in the green. So, but the business side, especially for the small and medium-sized companies, are not sure what is effective communication channel with consumers. So our policy tools are concentrating on better information and easier buying and more reward, which is articulated in the fourth action plan for national green purchasing. First, for the better information, we are using eco-label. The Korean eco-label is still a dominant position in third-party environmental claim. At this moment, more about 20,000 products and services are certified by the eco-label. But currently, in the past, we tried to expand the quantitative coverage of eco-label, but now we are facing the consumers are more want upgraded criteria, and they want to make us to ensure environmental superiority of the eco-label products. So we, especially the carbon neutrality becomes national agenda. People, we need to prove the eco-label is less carbon product, and also according to the COVID-19, the packaging waste becomes matter. So we have to reduce waste from the product. Also, the consumer is getting more interested in chemical safety issue. And also we are interested in inviting the sharing economy into our eco-label. So we are developing criteria for car sharing or rental service and many service categories. And secondly, in order to make people buy easier, we now have a green store designation program, which was initiated in 2011, and currently 750 retail stores are designated. This store helps consumer to choose green. For that purpose, this green store have to show the green product indication on the shelf to guide the people to easily identify and select the green product among the many different products on the shelves. And also they have to abide by the non-greenwashing rules. And also they have to provide the eco-friendly packaging and delivery service. And so people can easily identify the environmental preferability of the green product on the shelves by using their mobile phone to check the QR code. And lastly, we want to give more reward to green consumer by means of green credit card. This green credit card was first introduced in 2011, and now 6 million users are using this green credit card, quite successful. And also this credit card is usable at more than 50,000 affiliated shops in Korea.
1 minute left, Mr. Sisio.
Yeah, and this is a kind of cashback service. So the eco money point is given to the green consumer who are buying green product or secondhand purchasing or public transportation use. So this is 3 major green consumption related policy tools, and we regard it very successful. But still, we have many challenges to here. I will, if I have the opportunity, I will share with you in the later. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Seok, for the excellent presentation. Thank you all for panelists. We'll now start the Q&A, and I encourage the audience to continue to post your questions in the chat, and we'll try to find time to answer them if we have the time at the end. But first question which I would like to post is to ask Under Secretary Costello from the Philippines. Under Secretary Costello, a core focus of your presentation was on the DTI's 3 pillars for sustainable consumption and production. Could you please tell our audience a little more about Pillar 2 on the circular economy? What are the key barriers currently for consumers to engage in the circular economy in the Philippines? What initiatives are you developing to encourage, for example, the recycling and repair of products or the purchase of secondhand products? That's 2 minutes, you can start now.
Okay, thank you, Louis. We are all very familiar with the linear economy where you take, you make, and you dispose of the product. We encourage circular economy in the Philippines. For example, an example would be electrical devices that are designed in such a way that they are repairable and that spare parts are available. The manufacturer's design of the products should be that the products are reusable. Products and raw materials are also used as much as possible. And by recycling plastic, sometimes you can convert it into pellets for making new plastic products like monoblock chairs or other construction material. Circular economy should also be restorative and regenerative by design. This means that materials that constantly flow around can still be used, can be converted into other products, can still be are reused if possible. A very practical example would be of circular economy would be my experience this morning. When I opened my closet, I had 3 sets of clothes that are of the same design but are of different colors. And then I was thinking about sustainable consumption, that I was going to be here today, so I took out those clothes and figured out how I can upcycle them. And now I have different designs for these clothes. So a practical example, everybody, all of us here would have something in mind for circular economy. There are certain barriers in the Philippines that we also experience, of course. Many products that are manufactured today are very hard to disassemble or to recycle. And then there should be also policies that support a circular economy transition. In the Philippines right now, there is a bill on the single-use plastic, and there is a specific provision that encourages or that mandates expanded producers' responsibility. Producers in the Philippines. Okay, thank you, Louis.
Okay, yeah, I'm so sorry. In my hurry, I actually forgot to introduce our 4th speaker. I'm so sorry, Miss our final speaker, Miss Amrutchai Konmai, who is a professional level plan and policy analyst at Highlands Office of the Consumer Protection Board. She has worked at the OCPB from 2015, and she has a Bachelor's of Law and Masters of Political Science at the Ram Kha-King University, Bangkok. She'll speak about how the Thai government is implementing policies to encourage more sustainable consumption. They incorporate learnings from behavioral insights, in particular, both formal and informal education initiatives. Over to you, Ms. Konmai, and apologies.
Thank you, Mr. Louis. That's okay for me. I feel present too fast. Okay, green consumption for Thai people is a concept of environmental protection and responsibility in solving environmental problems. Consumers are trying to conservation of natural resources and already exist and will increase in the future. Awareness of the efficient use of resources and knowing the value of resources. The environmental policy guideline consists of the conservation of natural resources and focuses on the balance between cost-effective and to use resources for the environment of the country and conservation and resources restoration. Environmental policy starts with educating young people about the importance of the environment, increasing curriculum and technique material related to environmental, as well as learning from experience. The main objective of policy is to enhance knowledge about sustainable consumption to consumers have knowledge, understanding, and awareness in choosing to use products cost effectively and without damaging natural resources. Focus on changing consumer behavior to have sufficient consumption, promote environmentally friendly marketing, and the reuse of products, recycle. How to raise consumer and businesses awareness on green consumption. Strengthen cooperation between the public and private sector in using technology for the production of environmentally friendly products and the use of natural resources for maximum benefit. Promote environmental education, enhance awareness, and support sustainable consumption at all levels. Promote environmentally friendly economic and social growth. Promote production processes and cost-effective use to resources to upgrade the country to an eco-friendly economic and society. And the last, promote the integration of sustainable consumption and production strategy and best practice into national policy or as part of CSR activities. That's it. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Ms. Konmai, for the very excellent presentation. I'll now resume the Q&A. I think we've just, I'd like to move now to Germany to a question to Mr. Clemens. The Cycle-Karait, pardon the pronunciation, website and app is an innovative way of helping consumers test the credibility of and compare different sustainability labeling schemes. Since launching the initiative, have you seen any labeling schemes change their requirements in order to achieve a higher rating on the Cycle-Karait? How has the initiative contributed to developing higher standards around sustainability claims? Over to you, Mr. Clemens.
Thank you very much, and thank you for these important questions, as our aim indeed includes in incentivizing schemes to improve their systems. So yes, there are multiple schemes that started a revision process of their scheme on their requirements in order to achieve a higher rating on Siegel-Klarheit. You have to know that many labeling schemes are very eager to be presented well and see their presentation on Siegel-Klarheit as a quality check and an important marketing instrument. So usually the labeling schemes reach out to us and ask what they could improve in order to attain a higher rating. When they point out weaknesses we see from our evaluation and data collection and recommend changes that would be necessary for a higher rating. So yes, we in all our revision processes, we keep stakeholders such as the labeling schemes, but also experts from the sectors, academia and civil society in a closed loop and open the revision process to the public. So all demands are reflected on Siegel-Klarheit and stays a relevant and appreciated instrument.
Thank you very much, Mr. Clemens. Now I'd like to go to Korea with a question for Mr. Stanley Seok from KAT. Mr. Seok, the Green Credit Card program, which provides cash points to green consumers, is a very interesting policy initiative from the Korean government. How are you measuring the impact of this initiative? What feedback have you received from consumers and business participants?
Yeah, our performance indicator, the quantitative indicators is the number of the card holders and the amount of the sustainable product purchased, and the number of the business who are taking part in this scheme. But also we have a qualitative indicator is that the feedback from the consumer survey, that how much consumer is satisfied with this credit card, and also we ask the consumer how this credit card is helping their green choice. So we annually survey and we calculate the progress. Thank you.
Yeah, since you are still within your 2 minutes, there's this question from the audience. To what extent can the very interesting green store and green credit card initiatives also be applied in e-commerce transaction?
Yeah, our biggest challenge is e-commerce. Our the green store designation program and the green credit card is offline basis. But our challenge is how to keep catching up the growing e-market commerce. For that purpose, we have to designate the e-market shopping mall, and also we have to need a payment system, online payment system with e-commerce business sector.
Okay, thank you.
Development.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Seok. I'd like to now turn to Thailand with a question from Ms. Amratai Komai. A key part of your presentation was about sustainable consumption education initiatives in Thailand. How are you designing formal educational programs that have an impact with younger consumers? What role can digital tools play?
Okay, thank you. We not only OCPB, but the Ministry of Education are organizing activities by using the critical thinking learning process and new learning process to lead the sustainable consumption behavior of secondary students and university students. We establish a question to our students how to reduce the waste of school and university will get benefit as money from these activities. Then the student create a lot of projects to change the waste to be the products which can sell in the school, cooperative shop and their communities. After they benefit, they became interested in the recycling process, and it easier for us to educate them to the next step in sustainable consumption. And the digital is one of the tools our students use to support their consumption learning. Thank you.
Hey, thank you. You're still within your 2 minutes. So there's a question from the audience. I'd like to ask, how does Thailand government encourage consumers to use more eco-friendly product other than just to educate them? Are there any incentive, or does the government subsidize consumers who use sustainable product? It's a question from Korea KCA Jisok Yang. Ms. Konmai?
Yes. Yes.
Or would you need some time to think about the question, and then I'll come back to you afterwards? Yeah, if I may just proceed now to, we'll come back to you afterwards on that question, and you let us know when you're able to give us a feedback on that. May I now move back to the Philippines with a question to Undersecretary Costello. You mentioned in your presentation how the COVID-19 pandemic has changed consumers' shopping behaviors. I'm interested to explore how some of these behaviors may be in tension with sustainable consumption. For example, single-use plastics may be increasing for hygiene reasons at a time when plastic waste is a key environmental concern, and increased online shopping deliveries and returns may increase vehicle commissions if not managed efficiently by operators. How is the Philippines approaching these kinds of tension between environmental and health concerns? What role can consumer education play in encouraging more sustainable consumption and protecting health as we continue to live with the ongoing pandemic? Over to you, Ruth.
Oh, yes, Louis. Thank you again. We all know, like I mentioned earlier, that the pandemic has changed our consumer behavior drastically, actually. The Philippine national government has mandated the use of face masks all over the country so that we can avoid getting infected with a virus. And there is an issuance by the Philippine Department of Environment and Natural Resources where there should be legally acceptable management of used face masks and other medical wastes. Consumer education is also very much intensified in the country so that we can develop critical thinking and raise awareness of our consumers so that we can enable them also to be more proactive in ensuring their own safety while also protecting the environment. We have also, you mentioned incentives earlier. In the Philippines, we also have some incentives to businesses so that they will become more sustainable and more resilient.
Thank you, Ruth. Can I now move on to Mr. Clements from Germany with another question regarding the labeling initiatives? Mr. Clements, if governments are seeking to create their own sustainability labeling marks like green button, they must consider carefully how to make them distinctive and recognizable in order to have any impact, given the large number of schemes around. Have you been able to find evidence that consumers recognize the green button mark more than other sustainable textile labeling schemes?
Okay, thank you very much. It's not easy to say something about the impact, but I can say something about the evidence that we can find about using the green button. For now, 80 companies are currently offering products with a green button, and over 150 million labeled textiles have been sold since it was launched in 2019. Consumers are becoming more and more familiar with this label, so that we could see this according to a current survey. where 40% of consumers in Germany know the green button. That's good for us. It's now the fourth best known label for clothing in Germany. It has risen from the 5th to the 4th place in this case. So we think that these are great figures, especially considering that the green button is only 2 years old. So 93% of those survive are in favor of the German government monitoring compliance with social and environmental standards through a government-run label. So we also have received feedback that consumers have particular trust in the green button because it's a government-run label. And this is our approach, and we will continue our work to the green button. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Clements. Can I now move back to Korea? Mr. Seok, what further types of initiatives is Korea considering implementing in the near future to encourage more sustainable consumption? What areas are a focus for the Korean government? Example, labeling schemes, right to repair, etc. We also have a question from the audience, from Dominic Ogilvy. The Korean Fair Trade Commission recently imposed a 20 billion won penalty on Mercedes-Benz for misleading environmental claims relating to diesel emissions. Do panelists observe consumer law is increasingly being deployed as a policy tool for combating greenwashing or misleading environmental claims? Over to you, Mr. Seok.
Yes, so one of the challenges in the market is how to prevent misuse of green label, or how to guide appropriate proper use of environmental claim. The greenwashing is a big problem, but still the business side are not much aware of the ban on the greenwashing issue. So we keep giving guidance on the detailed guidance on the business side. And also we are now starting the greenwashing reporting center, so consumer can get report some illegal use of the green label or some greenwashing issue to our desk. Then we make some the conciliation between the disputers, and also the legal issue. I'm not sure of the Fair Trade Commission's what's going on. The Fair Trade Commission's penalty on the green claim, but it is a big issue, especially the carbon issue is becoming a big issue. So we need some kind of the legal arrangement between this kind of dispute. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Clements. We are actually running out of time. One final question to Ms. Konmai from Thailand. You mentioned the importance of public-private partnership in fostering adoption of environmentally sound technologies and processes. Could you please explain what kinds of partnerships have had a large impact in Thailand in creating more sustainable consumer product and services? And you have time, could you also maybe deal with that last question on how does Thailand government encourage consumers to use more eco-friendly product other than just to educate them? And are there any incentives? Does the government subsidize consumers to use sustainable product?
Okay, we collaborate many projects between public sector and private sector. At the present, the private sector attempt to encourage consumer use back instead of plastic. Moreover, the public sector, both of central government and local government, collaborate to educate the citizen about waste management in local community. Yeah. Furthermore, Thai government has attempted to raise awareness about sustainable lifestyle to the people in every generation, not only the education, but also transportation and other fields. Thai people choose eco-friendly energy and consider to recycle as much as they can. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. I think we have more or less just ran out of time already, and we'll have to bring this to the end of our second panel. I'd like to thank all of the panelists, and thank you very much also for the excellent contributions from the audience as well, for your thoughtful questions. Many great examples of policy initiatives have been raised, including those that incorporate behavioral insights, as also touched upon by our first panel, and digital tools as well, which brings greater convenience and accessibility for large numbers of consumers. It will, however, be important that our more vulnerable consumers are not left behind. So I understand now that it's time for me to deliver the closing remarks. Thank you very much. Firstly, Mr. Hugh Stevenson, Chair of the OECD Committee on Consumer Policy and Deputy Director for International Consumer Protection for the United States Federal Trade Commission, or FTC. Dr. Christian Rottlider, State Secretary of the German Federal Ministry for the Environment, Nature Conservation, Nuclear Safety and Consumer Protection, or the BMJV. Datin Roza Nina Binti Wahab, ACCP Chair and Deputy Secretary General for Consumer Empowerment, Ministry of Domestic Trade and Consumer Affairs, or MDTCA, Malaysia. Esteemed panelists, esteemed colleagues of the ACCP and the OECD, distinguished ladies and gentlemen and colleagues, good afternoon and good evening. Thank you very much for attending this brief yet informative panel discussion today. I hope that you have all received good takeaways that will be useful in your respective work. Let me congratulate the OECD on the successful convening of this event and to hopefully kickstart a long-lasting cooperation between OECD and ASEAN. We are definitely looking forward to future activities to tackle topics discussed today and for more information sharing. Although what has been discussed and mentioned by our esteemed panelists during this very brief yet fruitful event has been quite substantial, allow me to just close today's workshop with a few words. I'd like to reiterate what was mentioned by Datin Roza Nina Binti Wahab at the start of the event in her keynote, where she mentioned the impact on rising global consumption to the world economy. Of course, we can't ignore that this has been great for us so far. However, we must also be wary of the overall impact. I believe many of us saw how the current COVID-19 pandemic has caused many businesses and consumers to drastically change their day-to-day operations. The silver lining of this unprecedented turn of events showed us that markets, producers, and industries as a whole are capable to articulate and adjust to accommodate these sudden changes. So the question is, why can't this degree of articulation be similarly applied in the pursuit of sustainable consumption at least years ahead before the need actually occurs? Let me also quickly just say, over the years, many important researches have been conducted on this subject and resulted in many empirical studies mentioned by panelists today. The information as presented by Dr. Hudi Yani on food waste and its impact on food security provides a sense of urgency for all stakeholders to act. Tools such as product labeling, exemplified by almost all of our speakers today, would be one of the best ways to promote sustainable consumption, but requires a degree of credibility to convince consumers. In addition, eco-labels also needs to be clear, or SIGLIC chloride, as mentioned by Mr. Tino Clemens and Dr. Christian Rottlider, for consumers to assess how green or compliant to sustainable production is the product they are buying compared to others. However, as Dr. Paul Selvaraj from FOMCA explained, it's not easy to change one's behavior and consumption with many factors affecting their decision. Aside to education, awareness, social influence, institutional issues, there may also be lack of incentives for consumers to change their behavior, which is why one of the most interesting policy tools shared today was the green credit card, as mentioned by Mr. Stanley Siok from KT, where consumers are incentivized with discounts and reward points for purchasing green or second-hand products. Datin Roza Nina mentioned our ASEAN Circular Economy Framework, which was adopted by the ASEAN Economic Community on 18 October. In addition, the ASEAN Committee on Consumer Protection, ACCP, is also working on the ASEAN Sustainable Consumption Toolkit guidance to inform on sustainable consumption for both consumers, producers, and government all over ASEAN. We hope that these deliverables can kickstart our journey to sustainable consumption and give inspiration towards our peers who are also in pursuit of achieving goals 12 of the Sustainable Development Goals. However, aside to the nudge that we aim to do to consumers, let's not forget that government policy plays an important role should we seek consumers to change their behaviors. Economic growth requires a balance on social and national development and maintain the environment for future generations to enjoy. Ladies and gentlemen, before I end, Please let me thank Mr. Dirk Pilat, Deputy Director, OECD Directorate for Science, Technology and Innovation, for providing his warm opening remarks and moderating session 1 of today's discussion. Excellent job there. I'd also like to thank Mr. Hugh Stevenson, Chair of the OECD Committee on Consumer Policy, for providing his welcome and keynote speech. I'd also like to thank Dr. Christiane Roleda, State Secretary of the BMJV, and Datin Roxanina binti Wahab, the ACCP Chair, who also provided her insightful keynote speech before the start of the panel proceedings. Finally, and not the least, please let me thank the following and learned distinguished panelists from whom we have learned so much from. Dr. Hendrik Bruns, Competence Center on Behavioral Insights, European Commission Joint Research Center. Dr. Paul Selvaraj, Secretary General, Federation of Malaysia Consumers Association. Dr. India Hudiani, Junior Policy Analyst, Ministry of Environment and Forestry, Indonesia. Mr. Tommy Ciptajaya, co-founder and CEO, Green Hope Indonesia. Attorney Ruth B. Castello, Undersecretary for Consumer Protection, Philippines Department of Trade and Industry. Mr. Tino Clemens, Policy Officer, Federal Ministry for Economic Cooperation and Development, Germany. Mr. Stanley Siop, Korea Environmental Industry and Technology Institute, or KT, and Ms. Arutai Konmai, Plan and Policy Analyst, Office of Consumer Protection Board for OCPB, Thailand. Thank you once again to the colleagues from the OECD, Ms. Bridget Akoka, Ms. Time Burden, and Ms. Alice Weber, as well as colleagues from the ASEAN Secretariat for organizing and facilitating this webinar professionally. Finally, thank you once again for your attendance today. Please stay safe and healthy. Good night.
Thank you.